Walter Benjamin was a 20th century philosopher and literary critic. He is most known for two essays, The Work of Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction and Theses on the Philosophy of History. Both works discuss the ontology of 20th century state being and how technology has drastically altered the human experience. The 20th century was a tumultuous period in human history. Great advances in technology and science were made in an unprecedented time never before seen in the history of mankind. This exponential growth seemed natural and at times messianic. It was common view at the time to see the events of human history as a progressive force propelled by instrumental reason. In Theses on the Philosophy of History, Benjamin critiques this view of history that is characterized in dialectical materialism. The dialectical materialist conception of history is a perspective in where the aim of history is the liberation of the subject from its material conditions. In the essay, Benjamin contributes a lot of this perspective of history on the Christian worldview, in where man's goal is to reach providence by separating himself from the denigrated earth. The objects with the monastic roles assigned to the monks for mediation have the task of making the world and its tribes repugnant. The mode of thought which we pursue today comes from a similar determination. Benjamin states that the problem with this view of history is that it privileges the present over the past, and its contradictory nature, and where the goals of man's liberation is inverted into the repression of the human subject and nature itself. He uses Marx's theory of labor as an example, in where Marx privileges the achievement of man's labor as the ultimate source of progress and liberation of the worker, with complete disregard of the negative effects of labor on the environment. Benjamin further adds that this perspective is very similar to the perspective of fascism, in where the technocratic, overtly authoritarian state seizes control of all aspects of society and nature. This vulgar Marxist concept of what labor is does not bother to ask the question of how its products affect workers, so long as these are no longer at their disposal. It wishes to perceive only the progression of the exploitation of nature, not the regression of society. It already bears the technocratic traces which will later be found in fascism. Benjamin, being a Marxist and ethnically Jewish, the critique of fascism will lose all of his work. As with other Frankfurt School social theorists, Benjamin believed that fascism was a logical conclusion of the liberal political order. It is easy to see how Benjamin and others like him came to this conclusion with living in Germany in the 1920s and 30s, witnessing the rise of fascism and how democracy played a key role in bringing Hitler and the Nazis to power. Later in the essay, Benjamin presents the historicist way of interpreting the events of the past as a collection of events in the untaken mass. This perspective is contrasted against the historical materialist, in where there is a clear linear progression of history. Benjamin further states that the historicist conception of history creates a more harmonious relationship with man and nature, harkening back to the philosophy of the utopian socialist Charles Fourier. Compared to this positive conception, the fantasies which provided so much ammunition for the ridicule of Fourier exhibit a surprisingly healthy sensibility. According to Fourier, a beneficent division of social labor would have the following consequences. 4 moons will illuminate the night sky. Ice will be removed from the polar cap. Salt water from the sea will no longer taste salty, and wild beasts will enter into the service of human beings. All this illustrates a labor which, far from exploiting nature, is instead capable of delivering creation to possibilities slumbers in her womb. Benjamin ends the essay with a parable of the Jews' time as a subjugated people, and where the possibilities of a future of liberation is unseen. He relates the Jews' struggle as the origins of the subjective materialist conception of history, as the Jewish faith is the foundation of all Abrahamic religions in the West. Through the events of the past, the Hebrews create a messianic figure which will free them from the subjugated position. Benjamin, while virtually unnoticed during his lifetime, influenced a massive array of thinkers in the later half of the 20th century. A lot of his ideals were assimilated in the nascent Frankfurt School social theorists in their critique of post-war consumer culture, with its homogenization and subtle authoritarian nature. The culture industry, as Theodor Adorno coined, was a method of suppression by the state and where the desires of the consumers were dissimulated through a never-ending goal to fulfill the present principle. This spectacle of consumer society will further create the divide between the real and the objects of consumption, and where the individuals are no longer able to decipher the reality from the fiction displayed through consumer culture. The culture industry will later evolve into the spectacle by the French Situationists and the hyperreal by Jean Baudrillard in the 1980s, all theories informed by Benjamin's philosophy.